So thank you for coming and joining us. So Peter, please start the session.
Thank you so much, Emiko, and congratulations to all of the prize winners here. During the award ceremony, of course, we got to hear you guys talk really briefly about your work. And so I thought it would be interesting to use this platform for 30 minutes as an opportunity for us to get a little bit more in depth into each of your works, but to also maybe use your work as a platform to jump into larger topics, as each of your artworks do. And so I'm hoping that this is an opportunity to be able to have more casual, more in-depth conversations. Before I share a little bit about myself and the other jury members, I'd like to go around and give each of you an opportunity to introduce yourself. I'm actually, since we're going to be talking a bit about more global topics, social, political issues, I'm curious where each of us is coming from. It's perhaps to start with Miwa. Miwa, where are you beaming in from?
I'm beaming in from Los Angeles, where the skies are kind of yellow and orange. Not as bad as San Francisco or Oregon, but you could definitely still smell smoke here.
And in Chicago, it's the afternoon and the skies are gray and it's soggy. Maja Gehrig, where are you tuning in from?
Actually, I'm in Zurich, in my home, and there are strange insects flying around. So everything okay.
Things are still alive. There's bugs in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Randa Maroufi, where are you joining us from?
Actually, I'm from Morocco. I grew up there, and now I live since 10 years in France, in Paris.
And Paul Gilbert, who was working with Randa on Bob SEBTA. Welcome, Paul. Where are you tuning in from? Where's your green, your chroma key void actually exist in the world?
It's in my little mail cave in Brussels.
Cool. So we have quite the international network here. So I'm tuning in from Chicago, and perhaps we'll get a chance to dig into this a little bit, but obviously with Ars Electronica happening online, there's lots of limitations of a movement that once felt normal just a year ago, felt very normal. And so while some of us are experiencing a festival in real life in Linz, there's those of us like Miwa and myself in the United States who don't even have an opportunity to go to a cinema. And so perhaps we can dig into that a little bit later, but I'd like to ground this topic in this is an opportunity to honor the awards that you guys all received, and to offer a little bit of background on where I come into this and the process that was involved in choosing your work. So I was a jury member, and our jury was all online because this happened post birthing of this global pandemic. But joining me on the jury were a number of artists and curators and multidisciplinarians, Mimi Son, Eric O, Birgitta Hosea, and Mathilde Leven. So I want to give a shout out to all of them. It was a really incredible opportunity to get to look at all of your work and so much more, so much work, and to get to discuss it with each of them. Now, the topic of this conversation is what is animation? And more particularly, how do each of you animate the work? Now, that's such a big platform to dig into. So maybe to start, if we go around to give each of us an opportunity to dig a little bit deeper, to describe the process of each of your projects, thinking about films, performances, or hybrid media that we make. I'm curious to hear a little bit, not just about the process of animating the film, but all of you involve a lot of different processes. So I'm curious to also hear about what does pre-production look like in your process? What are the various production techniques? All three of you, four of you, have very different techniques in the films. And then, of course, who else was involved? With all of your work, I doubt that you all are making work exclusively in a cave, even though, Paul, you're in maybe we can start with Randa and Paul. Could you guys share with us a little bit of that background on Bob SEBTA?
Yeah. I will just start to talk a little bit about the post-production, and then Paul will turn me to talk more about the animation of the film. Actually, SEBTA is composed only of still shots. All camera movements are virtual. The floor drawings and signage have been added by Paul in post-production. It was very, very big work of post-production because it was, as I said, there is no camera movement during the shooting, and we added we created in post-production. There are around 80 shots in the film. But with two cameras, one frontal and one zenithal. And each shot has been staged in a rectangle of approximately 50 square meter. And the zenithal camera was like 8 high from the stage, and the frontal camera was 7 meters away from the stage. So in total, I think that it was like 160 sequences, shots. And then Paul has to manage with these two kind of shots to have some continuity for the movement. Just an example, only one car could fit in the frame. So each car is a shot that has been stuck to the other car and so on. And also each group of people is a shot that has been stuck to the other group of people and so on. So thanks to the software, we created a new 3 square kilometer map of the city of Ceuta, but not in 3D, but only using still camera shots. So it was a totally compositing made by collage. And maybe Paul can talk more about this part.
Yeah, so I took these little shots that were not quite that little. Each one of them were like a 4K shots, and I have to stick them together. So it was like a 260,000 pixel square composition at the end. That was the biggest composition I've ever made. So this territory came to life and was in fact animated at the end. I don't know if you have more time, but maybe it's enough for now.
Yeah, and perhaps we can, a piece of wisdom that was once told to me as a young animator is that once you actually finish making the film, the work, the performance, you're actually only half done. What needs to be done after that is to actually share it and show it to the world. But we will, of course, have a chance to come back to that. Thank you, Randa and Paul, and again, congratulations. Maja, Gehrig, could you give us a bit of insight into your process of making this film?
Yeah, I mean, Average Happiness is quite different from the other films that I made, because normally I have an idea and then the animation techniques come out of that. So I did children's films that were very classic with storyboard and animatic. But with this project, it was clear from the start that there was no possibility in doing storyboarding or animatic, because I just wanted to use these diagrams and take them actually from the internet. So the whole material Average Happiness is based on is found footage from the internet. All these diagrams exist. And I somehow copied them in Illustrator and animated them in After Effects. So basically the process was also kind of a collage in a different way, because I wanted to show many different diagrams to avoid one topic. I mean, it's about the overdose of statistical diagrams that we are surrounded, the idea that you can explain everything in the world by statistics. So there was needed this kind of layouts, hundreds of layers of different diagrams. And then it was more or less all the layers that create the narration or the humor in the film were added during this process, like the framework of the PowerPoint presentation, where you doze off into an erotic world, or just like the sceneries I had certain sceneries that were quite clear from the start that they would stay in the film. Others, I threw them away. But I was like working on all production layers at the same time. I did layouts, I did sounds already, like sound effects, atmospheres. And then basically also my composer, Joy Frempong, she was also starting with the music composition from the start. And I think that was very important, that the music and the image in this film are somehow created together and really getting a unity to transport this feeling of these trial statistics being something central in the end. And something beautiful that is completely away from their original purpose.
Thinking about, that's really interesting to hear that you didn't storyboard, you didn't use storyboards to structure the flow of the film, because it is a very, the film is about, in a way, structure. It's a PowerPoint that unravels. I want to shout out that on the Ars Electronica website that all three of you have artist talks, like 10-minute artist talks that people can tune into. And something that I think is really important, Maja, about your artist talk is that there are visuals that accompany everything. You feel that part of that unraveling of the PowerPoint structure is, I'm curious how much of that is chance operation, because you feel these psychedelic visual connections and sonic connections that are unendingly surprising.
Yeah, it was a long process, and I also had help from, I was working together with Paul Bush, who is an experimental filmmaker since the 80s, and it was very important to have a sparring partner to test ideas, because at a certain moment I was so fed up from this imagery that it was very difficult to understand what works and what not. And of course we were testing it also with other people, but it was really important to talk about it a lot and to find the consistencies. Still, if it feels like there are many different ideas, there is a whole structure behind it and a whole idea of how you could tell such a story.
Well, you managed to pull off making infographics a lot less boring. So
I hope so.
And last but not least, Miwa Matreyek, who won the Golden Nica with Infinitely Yours. Miwa, could you dig into a little bit, share some of your insights, a little bit of background on your process, pre-production process, your production techniques, and who is involved in making one of these theater, animation, stage show, video works? It's hard to describe because you're pulling from so many places and histories and techniques.
Thank you. So in terms of the pre-production, I don't really storyboard, but I kind of did for this one in terms of just kind of drawing on note cards with ideas about compositions, like very kind of, rough drawings. I didn't really come from a drawing background. But then kind of having these cards that I could kind of put in the order. From pretty early on in the process of making the work, I connected with my friend Morgan Sorn, whose music I'm using throughout the whole piece, throughout the 26-minute piece. So I was able to kind of make like a sound score by placing these cards in the time to kind of start to get an understanding of the arc and the structure that I wanted to create. And I was talking earlier in the interview about a lot of the images are inspired by news items that I've been reading over the 4 or 5 years leading up to last year, and that I had been kind of cataloging in an app called Evernote, just kind of like copying links and some images to be like, oh, I want to make sure that I include a section about, like drowning in an ocean full of plastics, or a section about like drilling for oil and stuff like that. So that was kind of like a mental marker of all the things that I wanted to create. And in terms of making the work, I come from a background in collage. So again, I think everyone said collage and like
funny.
Yeah. But
Theme of the
yeah,
year.
so the process is very much like a lot of things that I had shot, photos and videos, a few found things that I really took apart and rebuilt into new images. And And then, of course, the performance itself is almost like a collage because I'm combining cinema and theater, and my own body is sort of like becomes this cutout, almost like a cutout silhouette that's inside of these layers of projected animation. So in the process of making the work, because it's about climate change, it's like about my climate grief. It's about just me dealing with my overwhelm of, the trash that I create and plastic waste that I've created, and sort of in the process of the piece, kind of like having to come to terms with that and, trying to reduce my plastic waste because I'm like, well, I'm making this piece where I shot loops of all these like yogurt containers and plastic cups and stuff, and I need to figure out how to not to have this anymore. But so the image, all the plastic that's floating in the ocean is like my own actual trash. Well, some was pulled out from the apartment's blue bin, like the recycling bin. But and yeah, so there was a lot of things that I shot in the process of making the work, as well as a lot of footage that I found in my iPhone from 3-4 years ago, where I was on a road trip and came across an oil field or a river or a waterfall that I saw like years ago that I kind of scrolled back and like found the footage and composite it into the images. So I feel like there's a lot of my life kind of integrated into the piece as well.
It's interesting to recognize the role of collage in all of your films. There's this sort of stitching together and piecing together. Miwa, when you're talking about, I can't help but reflect, thinking about your process, you're literally digging through trash, right? There's literally this process of digging through the detritus and the material that's around you to sequence something. Now, I think it's important with and the three of you have made really different works, but this being a category for computer animation, it's animation. We're dealing with time, right? And so one way that I think about the difference between a conventional collage, I have some collages up here in my apartment that are great ambient works that are constantly unfolding, but they're literally static. As filmmakers and performers, we have to deal with time. Can you talk about your process of actually sequencing these, how do you actually come up with the sequence? Because all three of you, your work has really incredible flow and in different ways. With Bob SEBTA, there's something very sobering about that. And I'm curious, perhaps we can return to that, because I'm curious about your background that produces a sequence like that. But to Miwa, to hang out with you for a minute, could you share with us a little bit of your process of coming to terms with what ended up being a really incredible, what is it, about a 30-minute sequence?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the piece is 26 minutes. It's a very back and forth process because I am using a physical body. So, there might be, I think there's timing of animation and like a logic of like cinema, but then I have to make it work with the physical body and the physical limitations of what my body could do in like a second or, So there's a lot of back and forth where I would make like a mock animation and then project it in my living room. I could set up the projectors in the screen in my living room to test throughout the process of making the work. So then I would like test it and be like, okay, I physically can't do this transition. So there's a lot of pushing of that. So I feel like there's sort of, like I said, the music really helps to kind of build an emotional arc because I'm really building the sort of like the energy based on the music, again, by my friend Morgan Sorn. So I feel like there's like a tension that I was trying to navigate throughout of the musical tension and arc to sort of like the cinematic storytelling and sort of like the surreal intensity that I was trying to create visually, but then also what my body can do and pushing my body. So I do really quick transitions, but then having that be like kind of very visceral and intense and kind of jarring for the audience in some moments.
That's very interesting to think of your body as being a spine, the set of restrictions that creates the form of your piece. Randa and Paul, thinking of Bob SEBTA and the structure of that film, Randa, could you talk about your background? I'm curious what, when I think about a history of computer animation, your work is almost disguised as a documentary film. I could almost imagine some kind of new drone technology producing that kind of imagery. Could you talk a little bit about your background and the process that you go through to come up with the sequence of the story, the time that you're creating for us as an audience.
Yeah. Actually, I came from a fine art school. I was in fine art school in Tétouan in Morocco, and then our fine art school in France, and then I have a deep post-graduated from Le Frénois, Studio National des Arts Contemporains in France, where I actually started to make films. And this medium for me is, I find myself very free, because it's a combination between performance, between mise en scène, between sound, image, animated moving images, photography. And I think that, in the film, I can put everything that interested me. As I'm not coming actually from cinema background, except in Le Frénois, where we were like many profile of people. So yes, for me, now I think the film, but also photography, it's the medium where I can find, I feel more comfortable to put everything inside. And for SEBTA, I actually couldn't made. There is a lot of material in this border, and I couldn't put everything in the film. So this is why I choose to also think this project in more in other format, other medium, like drawings, like photographs, and like performance, and other mediums. But the film for me was the most important piece around this topic. And then what I couldn't put in this film, I tried to do it in other medium. And by the way, with Paul, we worked also about a book, sound book, that I'm still working on it, where I tried to put some drawings and also sound.
So there will be a book of SEBTA that we can look forward to?
Actually, it will be a book of some drawings. Nothing really. It's the question of representation, but not with photography. It will be drawings and with sound. That all the sound that I didn't use in the film, I would like to recycle it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to think about, knowing a little bit of background in your project, something about SEBTA, when I think about it as a plot of land, it's literally what Paul has done in this green screen cave. I don't know if that's where you actually work, but you've created a map. And in a way, the sequence of time that the audience goes through, is that what defines the extent of that map? Or Paul, did you actually create a space in software that extends much further outside of the frame that the audience has access to?
Actually, it was a bit of a headache at some points, because the territory had his own life at some point because of the duration of the shots and the sequences. So when Randa was asking when we were writing the movement of the drone, there was some constraints about what the shots were showing, about characters going in and out the shot that we couldn't show. So we had to manage between the time of the territory and the time of this floating camera. So yeah, not much that you don't see on the movie, because we made only what we needed. We don't make more territory than what we needed.
As a fellow animator, I can appreciate the amount of material that needs to end up in the final cut. You don't want to waste anything.
No.
We actually just have a few minutes left. And so I want to kind of shift gears and think about some of these kind of larger issues. I alluded earlier to this idea that once you've actually made your artwork, your film, you're only halfway done. My belief is that the artwork is produced when an audience engages with it. And so to think really specifically about this moment that we're in, where the cultural landscape has changed a lot, where, for those of us that are not actually at the festival in real life, where can we experience the work that we're talking about? Where can audiences experience your work? I don't know who wants to jump in.
Shall I talk?
Please, Maja.
Okay. Well, I think we still go for a traditional way to do this whole after the film is finished thing. I just missed the word in English, actually. Auswerten is in German. Because, I mean, I hope still there is a life after this pandemic, and then you want to sell your work maybe, and so you cannot, I don't put it online or do some other, and I also, it's not my decision, I have a producer and a distributor. But what is interesting about this whole online festival thing is, at least, I mean, you are sending without receiving a reaction. And for me, that's something very difficult because I'm not such a digital person in the sense of interaction with people. But still, I appreciate very much that the festivals are trying to find a way to distribute the work that we did. So there is an online version there where people can see the work.
Is it true that you're making a game or an interactive version?
Yeah, actually, yeah, it's true. It was already planned from the start that you can actually simulate your own diagram on your devices. So we are doing this now, and that will be a completely other way of just distributing and finding an audience. Yeah, but still it is possible. I think there are now, at least in Switzerland, again, festivals taking place physically, and the film was screened last week really in a cinema with real audience, and it was just...
So exciting. There
is no replacement for that.
Miwa, as a performer, I know you mentioned during the award ceremony that you made a new version of the performance, documenting it for Ars Electronica, of the pregnant version of the performance. In this moment, I imagine you're not actually going on tour with the performance. How are you thinking about this moment of sharing your work?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I've kind of had to kind of hibernate for two reasons. Again, the pandemic, especially in the States, but also the fact that I'm currently pregnant and I'm 8 months. So I literally, like, the recording that I did, I think was really the limit of being able to perform. I was like, oh, getting up and down. But I mean, for me, the work itself is the live performance. It's really about, again, sharing this empathetical space with the audience. It's not a pre-recorded version. It's about the audience being able to see me breathing and, like, see each step. And, if it's even in a really intimate kind of space where it's like a gallery style, not on a stage, they can even feel me like drop to the ground and like, they can feel the vibrations of my presence. And they see me enter and exit as well. So,
so we need to wait for that.
Yeah, IRL. I mean, like right now I've had to show some documentation as well as do a lot of artist talks. So kind of keeping the topic of the piece alive. And by talking about it, I mean, of course, like talking about climate change. And first, there's a few school districts where they're integrating my work into their curriculum. So talking about plastic waste and climate change. And then they would watch my piece through video, and then I would come in and talk about it in my process.
Excuse me, Miwa, since the time is really approaching to our session, I have to interrupt you. I'm so sorry about that. But thank you very much for this wonderful talk. That it's so interesting.